Hi, I'm John Kursky. This is Atlas, and today I want to show you how to set up agentic workflows in GitHub and connect it to the Power BI modeling MCP server. All right, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new content and training we'll be putting out in the coming weeks. And let's talk about GitHub Agentic Workflows. This combines what's nice about your chat experience in GitHub Copilot within GitHub Actions. If you've ever thought about, I would love on a regular basis, maybe every morning, my agent would do some set of instructions that I would normally just type in and hit enter and let it do it in Visual Studio Code. Or anytime somebody creates a pull request, I wanted to do a set of instructions that I would normally do to conduct a review. Well, this is what GitHub Agentic Workflows can do. Now, today I want to show you, using a template, how to get started with leveraging GitHub Agentic Workflows with the Power BI modeling MCP server so that you can generate documentation. Now, this serves as a template where once you kind of figure out how to do this or follow the instructions and you can see how to do this, you can think of a lot of different ways that you can enable your Power BI development process to have AI backing it, all within the security parameters of GitHub Actions and version control. So let's take a look. Up on my screen here, I've got the link to the GitHub site I will put in the description that walks through setting up GitHub Agentic Workflows. But I'm going to show you just some of the steps you're going to need. The first thing you will want to make sure that you do is if you follow the GitHub Start with the CLI steps, you are going to need to install the GitHub command line tool. I'm on Windows, so I already downloaded it and installed it. And then once you have that installed, you can open up Visual Studio Code. And if I open up the terminal here, there's going to be a process that you need to take let's see, do I have this already saved? I should. You will have to do this git gh auth login. And now there's a couple steps depending on how your multi-factor authentication is set up with your organization or your personal account. We'll go through these steps to log in and validate your credentials. Now, once you have that, you will then go through the process of installing the extension for Agentic Workflows. And you need this locally installed in Visual Studio Code because when we go and clone the repository that I'm going to give you as a template, we're going to need to use this command line tool in order to compile the Agentic Workflow. All right, so once you have that installed, you can go to our link here, which I will provide in the YouTube description. But this is an example with our Power Query team through Client First Technologies. This is a public repository that walks you through the process of setting up an agentic workflow that will look at your current semantic models in the repository and build documentation, leveraging the Power BI modeling MCP server. Now, if this is the modeling MCP server is new to you, at the end of this video, I will have a link to the playlist about becoming an AI-enabled Power BI developer, in which we go more in depth onto PBIP, how to use Visual Studio Code, how to commit changes, and leveraging the Power BI modeling MCP server. All right, so first things first, we're going to scroll down, and I like taking the option B route for importing the repository. If I click this link and I copy what I have highlighted here up on the screen, this will give you the ability to, you paste that URL in here, you give it a name, like let's say demo, and I like to make it private. Now, when you clone this, the models that I have in this repository are using public data. The reason I would say you put this private is, let's say at the end of this you want to commit your own semantic models to this template that you created in your repository. You don't want to make that public. So next thing you're going to do is you're going to hit the Begin Import button, and that starts off the process of taking that template, which again, you'll copy that here, make sure it's there, and hit the Begin Import button. That takes a couple minutes sometimes, so I've already kind of sped forward and already created one, and you'll get a message that looks like this. So I created one called Agentic Workflow Demo, and at that point I've got a version here that I've cloned that repository template that we have on the client first GitHub repo. So that's kind of the step one. We've already gone through the prerequisites. One of the things I do want to make sure is that if you are, you got to make sure you're an admin on the repo, because we're going to make some updates here that require admin privileges. GitHub Actions needs to be enabled, and you need access to GitHub Copilot. I'm making those assumptions here. Okay, so once we have that, really the step one is we need to set up the GitHub Copilot GitHub token. Now to go through that process, I'm just going to duplicate the tab here. Up at the top right, you can click on your avatar and go to Settings. And scroll all the way down to Developer Settings. Click on that, go to Personal Access Token, and we're going to pick Fine Grain Tokens. And we want to generate a new token. It's best practice to have tokens for specific workflows or specific repositories not shared. So I'm going to call this Agentic Demo. The resource owner is me. I'm going to set an expiration for 30 days, and I want to just have it for the Agentic repository. And then I'm going to click on Account, hit Add Permissions, and select Copilot Requests. That's the only permission you need for that. And then you're going to generate the token. I'm going to click Generate Token. Now, you do not share this token with anybody else. I am going to regenerate this after this video, so you won't be able to use it. But I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back to my repository, and I need to create Copilot GitHub token. So if I scroll up to the top here, I'm going to click on Settings, go to Secrets and Variables, and then click on Actions. Click New Repository Secret, and I'm going to paste that there. And remember, the token, we want to name this exactly, get the spelling right. So I'm going to copy and hit Add Secret. All right, so that's stored securely for the Agentic Workflow to use here in just a second. And the next thing we're going to do is, let me click back to the instructions, is we need to grant GitHub Actions the ability to create pull requests. The thing that we want to do is that when the documentation gets generated, it is going to create a pull request with the new documentation, not just update the main repository. We want to see what the documentation is before we commit it to the branch. So we will go back to our Actions button here and click on General, and scroll down to the setting, Allow GitHub Actions to create and approve pull requests, and hit Save. All right, so those are the two settings that we needed to have in place in order to start working locally in our repository to get the Agentic Workflow running. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to clone the repo locally. So I'm just going to copy that URL. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, click the source control button, and I'm going to click the clone repository button. Clone repo. Oh, I just want to Enter that in. Should have it pop up here in a second. Let's try that again. There we go. And then I'm going to pick my Git folder. Remember, a local folder, not OneDrive. Clone the repository. I'm going to open the repository. Now, I'm working in the main branch here. Good practice is you wouldn't be doing this in the main branch, but this is just for the purpose of the demo. I'm going to close the GitHub chat session that I have here. And notice in the top right, I've got a couple of semantic models, thin reports. And so those are the PBIP format, and I've got an empty documentation folder. So in the GitHub folder, this is where the Agentic Workflow is located. And you're going to see two files. The .md file is the actual Agentic Workflow. The lock file is what we're going to compile, and it's what GitHub uses to run. Now, this is really important because of the security parameters that are put around this. The YAML file gets compiled from the changes you make to the MD file. So it sets on what permissions that the agent has, what it can and can't do to other repositories. And so this is kind of GitHub's way of securing how an agent's going to behave. Now let's take a look at the MD file. So at the front, at the top here, we've got a bunch of YAML code that on the GitHub page or the GitHub Agentic Workflow documentation, you can read all about this. But the idea is I want to do, anytime something's been pushed to the branch and a semantic model's been changed, I want to be able to read the contents. Safe outputs is I want to be able to create a pull request. So once the agent's finished doing its thing within the bounds of the workflow, it needs to be able to do something. Does it create an issue? Does it create a pull request? You need to identify that. You can identify the engine you want to use. So I chose Copilot. You can change this to Claude. And then you can identify the tools and the capabilities it has, including the ability to access the Power BI modeling MCP, which I published on Docker Hub for you to leverage. You can go ahead and build your own version of this if you want, but I've put this out there because the GitHub Actions needs the Power BI modeling MCP in order to understand the TIMDL and be able to generate it. It doesn't need to go out to the service. It just needs the modeling MCP has the tools that it can look at the folders of the semantic model and generate the documentation. So all this at the top here is what they call front matter. It's all the permissioning that allows the Agentic Workflow to operate. And then what you would normally write into GitHub Copilot chat, these are the instructions that I have taken from the Power BI modeling MCP instructions and kind of expanded out on how I want to generate this. So this is the very specific instructions that I have given it. That's what's nice about this is once you kind of understand how this works, you can change this out to not just do documentation, you can have it do other things like best practice analysis, building tests. I might show you an example of that in another video. That's how this lays it out. Now, because if I was to try to run this Agentic Flow now, I'd get an error because I need to be able to compile it in my repository first because we want to put some control mechanisms around what this agent's going to do within the bounds of my repository. So I need to go to New Terminal, hit GHAW compile. Now at this point, in the source control, you're going to see that the actions get updated, but most importantly here, there's this one file that you're not going to touch is the Agentic Workflow, which identifies what permissions and the settings. If you try to manipulate this and have it different from the MD file, you'll get errors. And so this is the whole kind of idea about how Agentic Workflows work is we're using this log file to define how do we run the GitHub Actions. Now, if you're really interested, I learned a lot about how this process works from I have a link down here. Josh Ops has an excellent blog article. I've put it in the repository that goes into the components of the agentic workflow, as well as some of the security components in his kind of view. I liken it, if you're looking at how this operates, is there's a set of steps, and each step kind of goes through the process of setting up whether or not the agentic workflow can operate, what access does it have, what modeling MCP servers, what other additional agents or instructions or skills does it have. Then it actually runs the agent, then checks to see what can it do with that information now. Can it create an issue? Can it create a PR? Double checks to make sure there's no issues with the data through their threat detection, and then they have their conclusion. So, all right, I've compiled it. I need to commit it back to source control, so I'm going to add my message using GitHub Copilot, commit locally. I'm going to sync globally. Now, I could go into the GitHub Copilot, GitHub Actions, and run this manually, but what's really nice is I can just run this from the command line. So I should have this already set. Maybe I don't. GitHub run generate PBI docs. And then it will run the workflow. So I've named it after the workflow. The name there is just the name of the file. Now, if I go to the repository and I go to actions, I should see that action in the process. And again, you can see it's got the steps here: pre-activation, activation. This is pre-activation, and the activation is making sure it's got access to the tokens. What prompt does it have access to? The Power BI modeling MCP setup. The agent is actually executing the instructions. So activation is really looking at the front matter. Agent is looking at the markdown instructions. And then detection is looking at for any security threats. Safe output is looking at, all right, what did the front matter tell me I needed to do with the information after I was done? I'm sorry, what did the instructions tell me to do with the information after I was done? And do I have permissions to do that? And then it attempts to do it. And then conclusion is it writes a summary. All right. So as this is running, I will fast forward to the end when this completes, and I want to show you just what the output looks like. Okay, so we fast forward, and the agentic workflow has finished. Took about 6 minutes. As you can imagine, this is 6 minutes that you wouldn't have to build documentation. Probably you would spend a lot more time doing that than just 6 minutes, and this can happen in the background. Up at the top here, it ended up creating a pull request. And if I click on the link, you can see that it lays out exactly what it generated for the sample model relationships.md, put it in the documentation folder. I can actually click on the link to that branch and click into the documentation, take a look at, let's say, sample model. And you can see it put in an overview, relationship, tables, a lot of the stuff that I would normally have to write myself. Again, you are free to make updates to that, how you want the documentation built for your organization. But this just shows you the art of the possible, that with a set of instructions that you would normally maybe put into your GitHub Copilot chat or Claude, you can actually set up agentic workflows to run that prompt or that set of instructions to the agent within GitHub Actions. You just have to set up the front matter to give it the security apparatus to execute. All right, and with that, I hope you learned something today. We went over how to set up agentic workflows in GitHub and how to connect it to the Power BI modeling MCP server to generate documentation. I hope you kind of can see this as a foundation to be able to leverage agentic workflows for other aspects of Power BI development. Now on this channel, we will go over that, give you a couple other best practices or ways that you can leverage agentic workflows. But until then, thank you for your time.